alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Hello and welcome to Alive After Reading. I'm Tim Niederreiter, and with me today is a duo of guests, Connor Garrett and Kevin Garrett. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on.
Well, it's great to have you. Tell people about what's the name of your book and the book you co-wrote together remotely, even as far as I hear. Ooh, big ding. But anyway, tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so it's called Spellbound Under the Spanish Moss, A Southern Tale of Magic.
Okay. Yeah, I'm seeing the cover now. Unfortunately, this isn't a video podcast, but that cover is beautiful, and that's the only reason I say that's unfortunate.
Okay.
Yeah, that looks nice. And so it's kind of a nice, slim little volume there. I mean, it's slim by some standards. I write shorter books now these days myself, 50, 60,000 words. And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously. I appreciate a good 200-page book as opposed to a mammoth 800-page doorstop, which I've got a couple of those in my catalog as well. But anyway, so what's the book about exactly? It's called, it's you were telling me a little bit about this before the show, but could you repeat a little bit about this for the listeners?
So, hey, Dad, you want to kick us off? You're a lot better with the synopsis.
Okay. All right. Well, Spellbound Under the Spanish Moss is a Southern quest tale, if you will. And it's a story that Connor and I wrote over a period of 4 months. And we wrote it during the pandemic at a time where Connor was in Beirut, Lebanon, and I was in Atlanta, Georgia. And we consulted every day back and forth on the phone to get to this. But basically, it's a tale set in about 1920s along the coast of Georgia, near Savannah. So that's our environment, and it's based, our star guys are a father and son fishing team. He's a widower, and he's raising his son alone, and they go out fishing and day after day, and they're struggling to make a living. And one of the days they come in from work and they're careening the boat, and the father gets bit by a rattlesnake, and there's no hospital nearby, and there's no money, even if there was. And he tells his son to take him to the woods. There's a witch there, and the story begins there, where the witch says maybe she can cure him, maybe she can't. But there's a series of ingredients she's going to need for the potion, and they send the son on the quest. The father's in suspended animation. I hope I'm not giving away too much there.
That sounds like part of the premise. Like, it would be a question I'd have to ask if you didn't.
Yeah. Well, so he's a young teenage boy with that awkwardness that you go through as a teenager. You hit that 15, 16-year-old age. You're not really your own man yet, but you're chafing against the parental bonds there. You want to feel like you're smart and everything. So this is a coming-of-age tale for him, and a race against time to save his father.
Okay.
And he's going to meet some magical characters along the way. He's going to grow some courage along the way. He's going to meet some fantastical friends along the way.
Ah, okay. So would you say the book kind of falls into the young adult category, or is it more straddles the line, or is it different from that?
I think as we wrote the book, we sort of had in mind to target it toward 15, 16-year-old girl. All right. But then we found that a lot of our readers, the buyers of the book, have been women, from that age on up to like 55.
That's kind of how it
we've
rolls
been on with book clubs.
With YA, though, that makes sense.
Yes,
that is still the same. Weirdly, that is the same target audience as most YA. Not to say anything bad about it. That's just how it works.
Yeah, I think
people grow up and they still like the same stories in a lot of cases.
Exactly. Yeah, we all want to feel young and strong when we were up at our peak physically. We're on our way charging after something.
Yeah, once you climb that hill, it's hard to be on the downslope on the other side. The age hill.
Yeah,
which I've never really felt personally, never really felt like I got to the top. But whatever. So So yeah, so it sounds like a really interesting book. I mean, you got but and it also kind of hits that urban fantasy, a little bit of that vibe, that like modern or contemporary fantasy to some sense, even though I guess historical because of the time frame. You're doing a lot of stuff at once here, which I guess makes sense because there's two of you. You can handle that, juggle all those balls. I mean, granted, everybody has to do that sort of thing for your books. Like I don't know how many times I have heard it, but I think it's really true. They say that, no matter what your setting is, you got to do world building, that kind of thing. Even if you had a contemporary setting, even if it was like I was writing a book set in this room, I'd have to build up the world for the reader.
Yes.
So how do you approach that? And also, did either of you have any kind of specialization when it comes to the book, or did you kind of work on everything, each of you?
Yeah, so we definitely have specializations, and so I think there's two key questions. We definitely have specializations. Number one, I'd say my dad call him, if this was a company, he's master of plot, right? I'd be probably master of words, something along the line. Like generally we say that, and then we cross over a lot and do parts of it all because he can write this as well. I'm okay with plot myself, and so we cross over.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, like same as in a company, your different heads still have to be able to know a little bit about everything, but we're just better together, And then I would say, as far as for the setting, a lot of this setting came from, of course, using real life, using the real Savannah setting, but also thinking about how we wanted our characters to feel. We let our characters paint the setting around them. They're a mirror, and your characters should be. They're a mirror for what's around them. And so as our characters are going through their various moods and we're needing our characters to experience certain things, we're shaping the setting to sort of actually shape our characters. That was a large part of what we did. Besides that, we had a general feeling that we wanted to create. We did like the tone and the sensation of Big Fish and kind of some of the room that allowed for the whimsy and the humor and sort of the quite literally the fantasticalness of it, right? And we wanted to sort of do something like that. And so that's kind of what we did. So it's a tinge of darkness, but there's a lot of hope to it. It does touch on adult themes. Like you do look at death, you explore grief, you explore deception, you explore duality. So I think our characters are also a part of this setting as well. There's a decent amount of sort of original mythology. Like we have a whole mythology of even things that aren't made up, right? So like I think it's always interesting, right? You look at J.K. Rowling, for instance, what she's done. And a lot of her mythology, some of it is invented and some is based on things that are kind of a hybrid of other myths that were already in existence. But in our case, we even take some real world things like spiders, and we, just like their webs, we sort of spun our own mythology around spiders as well.
I see what you did there. Nice.
And we gave them sort of a reason of why, they'll come out at night and why they spin their webs. We have a pretty unique mythology in the book for all of that. And so there's a lot, and then in the next book, because it's a trilogy actually, there's a pretty unique mythology around moths, that we have in the books. And so we're trying to, and of course the magic is a part of this setting. We're trying to have a magic that isn't necessarily like, and I'm probably butchering how you say this, but it's not like the Deus Ex Machina kind of thing.
No,
like
you don't want it to resolve all the problems. You can't do that.
Exactly. So it's a bit of it's a mundane but growing magic that the reader will experience as the books go on. Book one, it's real. It's pretty fantastical. It's still powerful, but you don't see the full power in book two. You see a little more of it, but book two is almost more adult, and then book three is really where the magic explodes.
Okay.
And so that's what the readers are going to see.
Nice. I actually really like that kind of approach to setting. As I've written, I mostly write fantasy too. Take a drink for everybody who does that while when I reiterate a point on this show. But when I'm writing fantasy, I generally don't plan a series ahead because I'm not a planner, right? I don't plan my books, but I do like know that I want to say make this series 6 books long, so I have to keep making decisions that push it out to that length or something like that, for example. But but I'm very fascinated by what you said about the spider and the moth the mythology of regular things is fascinating to me. And you also brought up J.K. Rowling, which is a hobby horse of mine, honestly. Her work is interesting to me because of how actually semi-non-fantastical it is. Like, it's a fantasy setting, but there's very little there that doesn't have some sort of analog in our world, like a direct analog,
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I mean, and I like that you use the word analog in our world. Yeah, it's true. There's not a single thing in her stories that isn't somewhat inspired by our reality. And I think that's really important because you want to give your reader some sort of frame of reference. It's like you think you can't really have fantasy or sci-fi, no matter how fantastical or science fiction it is. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. Yeah. It's impossible. So that's critical.
And the farther you fling the story, I find the harder it is to write the story so that readers will understand it. So there's a level of just accessibility that becomes very, very, very viable. It makes more sense to everybody to have a story that's set closer to home in some way. I mean, I say as somebody who wrote a book literally set in a universe that is weirder than ours ever, weirder physically speaking than any other universe I've ever read, for example. It's science fiction too. So it didn't have any fantasy elements. People might disagree with me about that because the physics was completely made up, but there you go. It was a different universe. It had different rules. So that that was the hardest book I've ever had to write, and that's why it ended up also being my longest book. Anyway, enough about that. But it's interesting to me. But as opposed to that, we go much closer. And Kevin, I want to bring you in on this because I got to say I have a feeling you have a bit more experience with the world than I do, and I mean probably it goes without saying more than Connor in some ways. But because there's a gap there, But it's interesting that it's interesting to me, like the level of, because you said Connor, you said the characters like reflect all the points of the world, right?
Yeah.
Do you and I want to say when you bring your experience to a younger character, I mean it really applies to both of you, but I'm going to bring Kevin in first here. When you apply your experience to a younger character, are there things you kind of need to step back from? Do you find yourself doing that? Like consciously? Saying like, this character wouldn't get this. This character wouldn't understand this.
Step back in time to remember when I didn't know, and then you've got to find it again.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's some of that in the relationship. There's tension in the early part of the book between the father and the son. And Connor and I were trying to figure out how to do that. How do we make this feel real? The father-son tension. And we've had people ask us, "Oh, is that based on your relationship?" And then we go, "No, it's actually not." That part of the book, I wrote the son, and Connor wrote the father.
Oh.
I wrote the son based on how things were with my father, and Connor brought a level-headed father in, to the situation. Well, this is how I'd want to be if I was a dad. So.
Okay.
That's how we got to that. And you mentioned something else about based in the analog world. I mean, there's things that we've added in there, like for instance, there's an acid forest in the coastal savannah in our world.
Oh, okay.
But it's
not the Grateful Dead acid.
Okay. See, I'm not familiar with this forest, that's where my head had gone. But anyway, you were saying.
Yeah, I could tell.
Yeah. No, this is the kind of acid that'll burn your skin, but it's based on the analog, the reality that in the Caribbean there's a type of tree that grows down there. It's a manchineel tree, and if you're standing under the manchineel tree when it rains, it will blister your skin, the water that comes off the tree. And if you're near a fire of, if they decide they're going to clear a beach and they're going to cut down the manchineel tree, you're near the fire, it will blister your eyes, the smoke. Like it's dangerous. And so I'll go, well, okay, well, is it even possible for them to live up the coast like that? And I found out that they actually live in Florida and they live up as far as Jacksonville. So we just stretched the range another 100 miles and we created the acid forest there. And then, there's other things like that in the book. It was like, we'll take a bit of reality and then stretch it on. It's like, I think that the reader will make a step with us on that, because I can find myself believing, how did this happen? Why did this character respond the way they did in a certain situation?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. It's very insightful in a way that just like, yeah, you if you just pull it a little bit, you don't make him, you don't even make the reader make a jump, right? There's no leap of faith to trust you, and trust is really important when between the reader and the writer.
Yeah, it didn't just happen because we say so. There's a believability to the magic that's in the book.
Nice, yeah. So, when you approach the magic specifically, though, obviously you've got a lot of these elements, right? You've got different, like as you said, mythologies that are being woven together here, and that you're weaving together here. Geez, passive voice much? Anyway, but do you have one that's like central to the story, or because this character doesn't really wield magic at first? You're the son, right? So he's more explore. It's more like, again, like you said before the show, The Hobbit. This character doesn't have the magical power, but but he's exploring it. Yeah.
So I think a lot of it, it's a more secular magic, right? Like, I think if you look at a lot of the magic that's in, it even extends into a lot of science fiction, right? If you look at the symbolism in the Matrix, for example, and you look at, and then you look at the magic that's in, whether it's Chronicles of Narnia or whether it's in even Harry Potter, some of the symbolism, and especially with any of Tolkien's work, right? Then you're looking at a lot of religious symbolism, and a lot of kind of, especially Christian-based ideologies. In our case, a lot of what we were trying to do, or at least on my end, I was trying to do or think about as we were approaching the magic, was how, because there are some really great things that religion does in the world, and there are some things where maybe, depending on what you believe, there could be some gaps, right? And some things that maybe are left to be desired, right?
Yeah.
And one of those things is like, okay, well, if your religion doesn't make you love more, if your religion doesn't bring people more peace, if your religion, doesn't, I think basically these real world implications are just as much of a reflection of your religion, your beliefs, as whatever the religion is. Your religion is only as good as its impact on the real world, in my opinion.
That's a fair point. I mean, I can definitely see that argument. Yeah. And
so, but with a lot of these religions, and this is not an anti-religion rant, I'm not going down that path here, but I'm just speaking what I've observed and what I believe is the case, that a lot of these religions, they're sort of constructed in a way. I mean, you look at even in Roman times, right? A lot of Christians, a lot of the belief system there have turned the other cheek, and on and on. They're not designed, but as a result, people are waiting on a next life for life to be good so much that they'll settle for something now. A lot of our magic system is designed to where its impacts on your real life now are important. So, for instance, instead of telling, as an example, how death is dealt with in the story, instead of telling, the reader through, Samuel talking to Gareth, for instance, that, oh yeah, you'll see your mom when you go to heaven or whatever the next world is. There's implications in it that, imagine if, for again, I talk about being secular, but here I am going to reference heaven and hell, but them being flat on earth, right? In a way where you have, he tells, for instance, his son, that you can hear your mom in the wind, right? You can hear her. And whether that's true or not, the idea is that part of the magic of this life is meaning making, right? So he's meaning making of now. And a lot of what the magic that you're going to experience currently, instead of waiting for the next thing, is what you try to make of this life. It's very difficult and you have to work for it, right? But I felt like, and I think my dad felt this too, is that that's also the magic that we could give to the reader. How powerful is magic? It's what can we give the reader that they can then use in their own life, right? Like, for example, when you're writing, what's a kind of magic you can immediately envision? You can immediately envision that your words that you're writing down are spells. And if just put in the perfect combination, you can make the reader fall in love. You can make the reader feel some comfort, an anesthesia for their grief, and on and on and on. And this is the magic that you possess in the pen, right? And so you can think for the reader, well, what can we equip them with in their real life? And that's all proxy through our characters. So that's the kind of magic that we were trying to translate, was a magic that can be applied to the here and now. And that's what you'll see through all three books, even as they become more and more fantastical, is that we're aware enough of these religions. We've read enough of these religions to understand how we can turn this stuff and make it to where it's respectful to them. And we incorporate some of these core beliefs, but even so, they're distilled into a second. And when I say this, it's not to say that, for instance, my dad's not a Christian, because he's more of a Christian, right? That's his belief system. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not quite sure what you'd call me, right? But that's kind of what we're trying to do with the magic system.
Okay, and that is really fascinating, and it really it rings very true to me that because every religion has weak spots, has hypocrisies that are created by the systems that occupy that religious space. Even say the ones I really like, I really respect the sort of mythologies and systems that I really think work pretty well. In this case, for example, I mean, I can think of a great example. The Hindu system, Hinduism has some great ideas and very practical ways to live that are almost like magic in their own right. You know, fulfill these things, you will feel better, you will do better stuff. And it's more of a practical approach in that sense. But they also have the hypocrisy of saying, like, well, this person's blind and they were born blind, so you can't they can't even beg. You can't give them anything because they deserve what they get, because that's their karma or whatever. Like, that's right. But not everybody in that religion will believe something like that. But that's still the custom that follows with a lot of those things, right? So and even a society like in India, for example, the society is, and that's probably where this would be the most prevalent. You know, if you're not like, you know, if you don't buy that particular thing, you might still not, you know, you still don't want to, as a native, you still would follow that rule perhaps because you don't want to cause trouble, basically. And so there's a certain amount, there's all this pressure that comes from systems. Anyway, this is a whole other story, but anyway, but those systems, that system's pressure it comes from all over. It's not just religion. I'd say it's literally just about every system applies that kind of pressure to its adherents. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, that's a very serious tangent, and this show normally doesn't go to that place. But oh well, weird things happen sometimes. So, it's going to feel weird if I ask you about just what it's like to collaborate, because I think we already got a pretty good picture of that. But I do think it's interesting that each approach that you approached is like as having different characters that are kind of you're guiding more directly. And I think we already touched on that. So let me ask you one other thing. When you because I'm fixated, but I think it's a good fixation. The characters reflecting the world. That is such a right to my heart thing, because I believe things mostly the same way. I mean, when I write a story I'll write a story. I first carve the character out of the world. You know, I make the world, because I write a lot of secondary worlds and weird futures and stuff. And I'll carve the characters from that setting, and then they will be of the world, but they will also be able to move within it. And I know, I mean, obviously you're working with a world that looks a little like ours, at least a lot like ours, actually, probably. Yeah. But do you have a sense of where how do you get that sense across of where your characters come from while they are traveling through the fantastic?
If you want to talk about it, you can. Or ideas.
No, I don't know, Connor. I'm kind of stuck on that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I went on a bit there.
No.
Normally it's a little less tennis on this show, but it's whatever.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we were trying to think about with our characters, just like, okay, same way that, and I'm going to make a few business references here, but same way that if you have a business, right, one of the main things you're trying to do first is figure out what the consumer's real problems are, right? And so I think in our case, a lot of times when we're writing, we're trying to figure out, well, what's sort of a problem that we can solve? Okay, so I think a big part of this story in particular, and for me personally, at least, I would say that in any of my writing, death is an enormous problem, and I'm treating it differently in everything that I write, but it's always there. Even if you're reading, you could be reading a story that I wrote about a bunny rabbit, and I promise you, death would still be in there. Even if it wasn't.
That's been a lifelong theme in your writing ever since he was a child. Yes.
Wow. Yeah. Not to be a piggybacker, but that's actually kind of true of me as well. But yeah, go on.
Yeah. I have to because it's that finality is what you have to make meaning of in your stories. And so that's another part of it. So our characters, they're sort of solving a problem, and they're dealing with their lives differently, and they're giving their different philosophies to us based on that. So Raven, she has a different philosophy than Gareth does, than Samuel does, than Evangeline does, than Wally does. They all have different philosophies, and then that also informs their personalities, right? And their experiences have informed their philosophies. So all of these things are tied together. So that's what I would say about how we sort of shape our characters within the world, is that we're looking at it. Oh, and then to that, that their philosophies and their characteristics also determine how they're going to interact with the world. So that's in really simple terms. That's kind of the progression there. Yeah,
no, that's great. And just in general, I want to ask about the sort of. I mean, we've talked about this a little bit, but the sort of have you either of you read any books that you say were direct influences on this? We've talked a little bit about the movies that influenced this story, but any books besides The Hobbit, which I think came up already. Yeah.
Dad, you want to jump on?
Are you asking?
What sort of works would you say this kind of belongs in the tradition of, kind of thing?
Well, or were influences?
Influences or works that informed this book. Yeah. I mean, except for just probably everything you've read, but honestly, there's a lot. I mean, that's how it works for me anyway. I imagine it's similar for most people, but anything specific. I'm looking kind of for a recommendation here for people besides your book, what they should go out and look at if they're interested in this sort of stuff.
You know what? I think it was. Connor had struggled through a first Southern novel, and I had struggled through two, and pitched them aside, just dealing with the critic within, just couldn't get through it. And honestly, just having that day-to-day accountability over the phone and the WhatsApp with Connor just kind of pushed each of us. It's like any day that I got stuck, he was there, and vice versa. It was like I felt an accountability that I'm gonna have to be on the phone at 8:00 tomorrow morning, and I need to bring something to this. Like that rhythm kept us going and drove us out of it. But I dropped that in to answer the question. It was like when we saw Big Fish based on Daniel Wallace's book, and it just hit us, and we go, I don't want to write that, but I want to write something that inspires me and entertains me and makes me feel things like that book did.
Okay, you want something that fits with that same approach or that same output of storytelling. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I want our version of that. I want a magical tale set in the South. This is what we grew up with, and we took the trip over along the coast from Charleston on down to Savannah, and we feel all of that in us. I mean, when Connor was in school, he went. Connor, you were over on the coast for weeks, weren't you? Over at like Cumberland Island and all along the coast there. Yeah.
This is a completely unrelated book. I mean, I don't know that it necessarily ties into ours, but just a book that I'll always find inspiring, and that in some ways, just in terms of kind of the cleverness of it, I feel like had a subtle effect on us. Again, not even related to the genre.
Sure, that's fine. Just nail it.
Slaughterhouse 5 by Kurt Vonnegut.
Nice, good pick. That makes so much. I mean, from what I know, I haven't read all of Slaughterhouse 5. I'm actually reading it right now. Okay. One of my many books that I keep that I'm like halfway into, and I'm like, I need to go back. But that is that is such a beautifully written story, and yeah, fascinating.
So smart. It's so clever. It's so clever. I mean, best well, I haven't read every anti-war book, so that's not
hard to do that.
Best anti-war book I've ever read.
Okay,
you know?
yeah.
Beautiful postmodernist work.
Well, awesome. Great. Yeah, I mean, we're about out of time, but it's been great chatting with you guys. Connor Garrett, Kevin Garrett, where can people find the work that you guys have put out, and the book, and your stuff online, if you have a website or anything like that?
So you go, Padre.
Oh, no. Go ahead, Connor. You're going to talk about Lucid House. Please do.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, for Spellbound Under the Spanish Moss, you'll find it on Amazon if you're a retail buyer. But then if you're an independent bookseller, we've got it on anything that is related to Ingram Spark. So any of their outlets. So for independent bookstores, stock up on it, man. Promise your readers will love it. So that's number one there. And then as far as our social media handle, my dad's is at Garrett Photo. So GarrettPhoto. He's a lifestyle and advertising photographer. So he shoots for pretty much everybody under the sun. So definitely worth checking out his website, what's your website right now?
It's my name, kevingarrett.com.
Oh, nice. You got that. What a steal.
And there's an email on there, and there's a phone listed on there. So, this way we can keep up, Tim.
Get in touch, stay in touch. Yeah. So great having you guys. Anything else you want to add about that?
Yeah. So we also have a publishing company that my mom and I started. It's called lucidhousepublishing.com. So LUCIDHOUSE publishing.
Yeah. You don't have to spell publishing. That's a lot of letters.
I realized, why am I spelling this, man? This isn't the most complicated thing to spell, but
yeah, Lucid's helpful. Not everyone knows that one, but yeah.
Absolutely. But we got to be respectful to our dyslexic listeners. So
that's for sure.
Dyslexic out there, just know we love you. So that's our publishing website, and basically, and our Instagram is at Lucid House Publishing. I'm not going to spell it.
No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about spelling it. We are past time as it is.
Okay.
No hurry though. But as for this podcast, thank you so much, guys. It's been really great having you.
Thank you for having us on today.
And as for this podcast, you can find us at mentalcellarpublications.com. You can find my works on. And Mental Cellar, it's a basement. So for those not familiar with it's not cellar with an S, it's cellar with a C and an A.
So we should spell this.
Yeah, I should spell it, but I never do. So don't worry about it. You can also find my work at timniederwriter.com. And my last name is hard to spell, which is why those are basically the same site as mentalcellarpublications.com. And then all my books are on Amazon.com. Most of them are in Kindle Unlimited if you're into that. But they're also all available as print books, and this on Barnes and Noble and all the other online stores, so as well as Amazon. So check those out. The latest one, folks, is Temple Theater Book 1, The Forgotten Mask. This is really a labor of love that it lasted 7 years. But since I started the book before I completed it, most of that time it just sat on the shelf, honestly. But it wasn't collecting dust; it was collecting ideas, and it's out now. And the second one should be out in August, which is right around the corner. So middle of August, probably, for Beloved of Death, which is the second book of the Temple Theater series. And of course, there'll be more to come from that. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks again to Connor Garrett and Kevin Garrett. And stay safe out there, folks. Have a good week, and I'll talk to you again soon.
That tears it.